Hello and welcome to another exciting presentation demo on Microsoft Entra. And today's topic would be Microsoft Entra Permissions Management. Um, I created another video on Microsoft Entra a few weeks back that covered the verified ID portion of it. And I promised that in the second video we would be doing the permission management. And here we are. It's just that these two features is difficult to accommodate in one single video. That's why we have two separate videos. So if you have not watched my first video on verified ID, please do watch it. And without any further ado, let's just get into the permission management feature set of Microsoft Entra. And as always we do in all our presentation, right? I try to first justify the value proposition, why and what this offering is, and why should an organization choose to go this route, right? This is the core fundamental of any technology that we use, and I will try to address those points in the next few slides. So the first important thing that we all know that the world is changing, right? And when we say world is changing, more and more organizations are embarrassing multiple clouds or multi-cloud scenarios. Now, when we talk about multi-cloud and we talk about permission management, the solution should be holistic and it should be able to cover multiple cloud providers from permission management perspective. Primarily what I'm saying is that our solution, the permission management solution, should be multi-cloud centric solution, and that's exactly what Microsoft Entra Permission Management offers. So it would cover all three major cloud providers, CSPs, whether it is Azure, whether it is GCP or AWS. Obviously, the services runs from Azure, but that does not mean the scope of this permission management is limited to Azure, and that's exciting. That's very interesting to see. Moving forward, what is this Microsoft Entra Permission Management is? Actually, it is following the Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management SIEM fundamentals, right? Or I should say KEAM, not SIEM, sorry, apologies. It's called as KEAM, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. And it's revolving around three major cloud service providers that you already know. Now, the fundamentals again are very simple that you discover. Basically, you collect what you have, whatever permissions you have provisioned, and then you try to relate it whether those permissions are being utilized effectively or you have ended up in over provisioning. And trust me, this is the most common case you will find, right? Have you over provisioned it? And then once you do that, you can visualize and you can see, oh my God, this user should have only these two roles or these three tasks that he should be allowed to do. But on the contrary, we have given him 10,000, 5,000, 6,000 rights, which he or she should not have it. Now, once you can visualize those things and you can realize and you can see that this is over provisioned, the privileges are extra additional privileges have been granted, then obviously you can optimize it by either removing those permissions or adding those permissions, whatever the case may be. And at the end of the day, you start helping your organization to protect it, basically improve the overall security posture. Now, this is not a one-time activity because our environment, cloud, is dynamic and things keep changing. That means that this detection has to be a continued process, and it has to be a continuation remediation effort, which makes it more interesting and more challenging at the same time. Now, having said that, if you look into this philosophy, this mindset of KEAM here, you would probably realize that it very closely matches with the zero trust principles, right? And quickly, we should look into what those three zero trust principles I'm talking about. Without going into the granular detail of zero trust, which is another topic, the zero trust actually revolves around three fundamentals. One is verify explicitly, second is the least privileges, and third is assume breaches. And you would see that Microsoft Entra actually is covering all three of them very effectively. And the core central piece of it is the least privilege, right? We all know what least privilege mean. We all talk about least privileges, but be honest and say and look into that. Does that really get implemented in our organizations? Perhaps not. That's the hard part, right? Saying it easy, but implementing least privileges is the toughest part. And you will realize it once you see the demo, that how bad or how good it can be. And if you start using, and even you do that trial version of Entra, you would see that in what shape your organization is from the least privilege model. And I can tell you, and I can assure you, with my past experience working with several Fortune 500 organizations, you would be surprised, if not shocked. I would say either shocked too, but I'm using a milder word here. You would be surprised at how bad these permissions are, how over provisioned your organization is. And obviously, this is this is causing a lot of problem, and this is a potential for several security breaches in your organization, right? Now, as I said, this is not the topic for zero trust, but let's just quickly touch two more important points when we talk about Microsoft Entra related to least privileges. Two things just pops up in my mind when I talk about least privileges is just in time administration and just enough administration. I don't think I have to explain you what these two are. They are self-explanatory, but they have a profound importance in an organization when we talk about improving their overall security posture, right? And Microsoft has been doing both the features very effectively for quite some time. Even before the introduction of Entra, we have been leveraging the just-in-time feature very effectively with different offerings. Say, for an example, the privilege identity management in Azure, right? Access packages, access reviews, they are already there. So what does this product offer you? Why do we need to go this route? This is an interesting question. Does it bring a better value, or is it overlapping with existing PIM solution? This is interesting, and it's not that easy question to answer. I'll try and attempt my best to give you both the use cases here. But one thing is crystal clear as far as I'm concerned, right? With just-in-time administration, with this existing technology, whether you use PIM or access package or you do access reviews, you can define the just-in-time administration, but as far as the just enough administration is concerned, that is still a very manual work, and you may or you may not be doing a good job there. And most or likely, this is where the problem exists, because you can assign a role for a timely fashion and say, hey, I can give you an ownership right or a contributor right or a VM contributor right for 5 hours or 4 hours, and you activate it and you get it done, and that meets the requirement for just-in-time administration. But does that meet the requirement for just enough administration? Perhaps not. Even if you have created the custom roles, right? So you may have given excessive permissions to that user, which is the core premise of this Microsoft Entra that we're going to look into, right? So remember and focus on just enough administration. And as I promise you that Microsoft Entra would provide you both just-in-time administration and just enough administration in a very different perspective. And you will see the difference, right? If you are familiar and you have been using PIM or access packages in past, you will see a sharp difference in how Microsoft Entra deals with it and how you have been dealing it in past, right? So that's the core premise here, and let's just stay focused. Let's move on to the next important discussion point, which is the permission creep index PCI. Obviously, this PCI is not the payment card industry here, but this is where the core issue is. All of us have been dealing with it. I don't think any organization, small or big, is an exception to permission creep. We know that our environment has been over permissioned. We know, but we don't know what to do. And to get that thing done manually is a Herculean task. Sorry for my terminology here, but it is really very difficult to do this work manually, and especially for larger organization, in organization that has been operating from cloud perspective, it becomes more difficult a problem, because you start accumulating these stale permissions, stale roles and rights, which nobody had any time to clean it up. And it makes it more difficult, more challenging to deal with it. Obviously, when you have those permission creep, your organization is more vulnerable. So your security is posture is not where you would like to be. And that is the core concern of every CISO that works in this environment, every security personnel, right? So how do we deal with this PCI? This is what we're going to see in our demo down the road, and keep an eye on it, right? And then you will see how bad or how good your organization is. And I will not be surprised that you would be say, oh my God, that's probably the word that would come to your mind as soon as you run the tool and you start seeing the analysis of what your organization and how the organization has been provisioned as far as the permissions are concerned, right? So let's see, and we'll see that in the reality once we get into the demo. Now, when we talk specifically about Microsoft Entra Permissions Management, obviously a no-brainer is a multi-cloud centric. And the analogy is very simple. You discover, you collect the data, you collect what permissions have been given, and then you analyze it. You figure it out what you need to do in terms of remediation, whether you want to remove permissions or in certain cases you want to add permissions, and then you continuously keep monitoring, following, again going back to the zero trust ideology here, right? So you're following the fundamentals of zero trust. And if I go a little bit more granular from Microsoft Entra perspective, we discover, basically we collect all the permissions, the data set from any cloud provider in this scenario. Then it is done the deep analysis of that information, the data that you have gathered. And when I say analyze, just making it try to simple, you have given a user, let's say 5,000 different task permissions, but you realize that he or she only uses one or two. So that looks like it's an over provision. Basically, the PCI index will go high, right? Now, once we identified, once we have analyzed that, we have collected the data, we have analyzed the data, we realize, oh, he should not have this role, or he should not have these additional 10 permissions, or whatever the user may be, then we need to remediate it, right? Remediation maybe, it is still a manual work because you're analyzing it and you're remediating it and saying, okay, I'm going to remove this task, or I'm going to remove these roles out of this user, and keep going, or in certain cases you might have to add it, but it's still a manual work. But you also want to make sure from automation perspective that your organization, your permission management stay healthy and to the standard that you define. So for that, Entra also offers you an autopilot where you can create certain rules, and based on rules it could take corrective actions. Now it is a caution area here, because this could be tricky, right? This is, theoretically it looks good, but implementation could be tricky because unless you understand your whole environment and whole baseline and footprint, this would be the most difficult part in my viewpoint to execute on, right? Now, as I said, as a principle of zero trust, you need to assume breaches, right? That means that environment has to be continuously audited, deep audited, and you need to continuously keep monitoring. So you should have a robust reporting system, which is what you would see that Microsoft Entra offers you, right? So I think this is enough talking about Microsoft Entra, and you would not believe it, as I will not, unless you see this in action, right? So time for action. Let's get into the lab. Let's start looking into how we provision it, how we do it, how do we utilize it. All right, I'll see you in the lab. All right, we are in our lab, and this is the fun part of this presentation. We're gonna go into the technical deep dive demo. So I'm logged in on my Entra portal, entra.microsoft.com, with my global admin ID, and we're gonna start working on permissions management. The first thing that I want to show you, the permissions management, the cost feature, because cost is very important for any solution to be considered. And the cost here, let me go back here from licensing perspective. So the cost is $10.40 per month per resource, right? So for my environment, I have a very minimalistic lab here. We have got only one VM. I got one storage account, a couple of NSGs, or one NSG, I guess. So it's very minimalistic because I'm just testing it. This is my trial license. But in your environment, when you are working on Azure Entra Permission Management, this would be a key consideration to look into the price factor. $10.40 per resource is you're going to cost per month, right? That's one thing. Now, as soon as before I start there, so the first activity after you have started your permissions management, basically you are licensed now for permissions management from Entra, then you need to create your data collectors, right? So data collectors, as you see here, this is confirming my point earlier made, that it is a multi-centric permissions management solution. It works against AWS, Azure, and GCP. We're going to start with Azure, which is our core area, and if time permits, I'll show you on AWS and GCP as well. So the first point here is the data collector. Now, data collector is one thing that I'm going to show you momentarily. After that, once I get to the data collector, and then we will try to understand the authorization system, right? So as soon as you come to the Azure, you click Azure, you click create configuration here. The moment you do that, it would create an Azure Active Directory application for cloud infrastructure entitlement management. So before I go there, I'll show you this here. If I go to my Active Directory for a second, and I go to the enterprise applications, and I select all applications, cloud infrastructure management, right? And if you see the application ID right here, guys, this is what the Entra would be saying here, right? This is the application ID right here, right? So that's what it automatically does as soon as you click the create configuration option button there, right? Now, the second important activity for us, which has two options, basically you can create a controller in an enabled mode or disable. You can disable the controller. What controller means here, that do you want to do write operations from Microsoft Entra portal? What it means is, do you want to do a remediation task from Entra portal, or you want to do it through a separate account, through a separate process? So first requirement here is that this cloud infrastructure entitlement management application has to be given the read rights. As you see here, it has to be given the read rights based on where you want to give it. You can give it in the management group or subscription, right? We'll come back here in momentarily when we talk about authorization systems. And you give the reader rights. Either you do the CLI, PowerShell, or you do manually, right? But in order to enable controller mode, this is what you need to do. You need to allow the user access administrator role so that you can run the right operations from Entra portal, which is very important. And people who understand the role-based access control, they should be able to understand this very clearly. Reader role will not allow you to do that. So I have done it. Let me show you what I did here. So this is the cloud infrastructure entitlement management. Let's go to the management groups. And I have got MG, which has both the subscriptions included into that. Access control IAM. I can check my access here, and I can say cloud. And I have got both the rights here, reader as well as user access administrator. That means I have enabled the controller there. Let's go back to the portal and see what does it really mean from Azure portal Entra perspective. Right? Since I have done, I can go to the authorization systems, right? Now this authorization system is an interesting concept. It varies from CSP to CSP. Basically, if your CSP is Azure, it's different than GCP and AWS. Inside Azure, the authorization system here tends to mean your subscriptions. Each subscription is an authorization system. Some people might get confused here, because where are you authorizing? Where does the resources reside? That's what is your authorization system, right? It's not who is authorizing it. That's a different story. It's what you are authorizing. What resources are being authorized, that's your authorized system. So your resources are in subscription. Azure resources are in your subscription. That's where you are assigning permissions, right? And that's the cloud infrastructure, right? So basically, and it may differ from AWS to GCP perspective. We organize in Azure our resources from subscriptions perspective. So that's what is our authorization system. And if you see here, the controller status here, which is what we discussed, is enabled. Had I not given that application the user access administrator, this would be a disabled right? So what does that really mean? I mean, I will go there, but once we go to the remediation task of a particular user here, and then we can see here all, then you will see that it will allow you to download a script. It would not allow you to execute if you have the only reader rights and you have not enabled the control. I'll show you once we get there. I don't want to jump there. Now, going back here, one more thing, right? So we understood this part. We understood the authorization system from Azure perspective. Inventory, this is what the inventory is, right? This is on the app. This is where the only infra is my virtual machines, network interfaces, network groups. This is all what I have today because it's very minimalistic, right? Once you go into your environment, you may see a very different picture, correct? So currently the environment that I'm working, I have about 9,000 virtual machines there. Forget about other stories, right? So it would be massively big. I have about 54 subscriptions in that environment. So anyhow, so this is licensing part. I discussed about $10.40 per resource, and here you go, right? So you have got compute, serverless, compute containers, which includes Kubernetes, databases, and whatever your total number of resources are, right? So this is how your costing would come into picture. Since we have understood this part of our configuration, there's one more thing that we need to understand. One is the user management, right? So if you go here and you click here, you will find the user management here. And depending on, let's go to the users here. So because I'm logged in here as this ID, which has got the global admin privileges, this is the account that provisions the Microsoft Entra Permissions Management. So it has got all the rights, right? So you will see once we go there, it has approver, requester, all the possible rights. So if I show you here, see here, admin for all authorization system types. So I can do anything in this environment from Entra perspective. You could have custom too. So if I cancel it here and see this another user and view permissions, now this is another user, right? And in this case, the permissions are different. She only has the viewer rights here. And that means that she can read the data here on Microsoft Entra portal, but she cannot execute any task, and her information would be very limited. Even the read option is very, very limited, right? It's not wide open. The advantage of doing this is that she would be able to create my request, which is what we discussed earlier, which is permissions on demand, which is very important. Otherwise, she cannot create my request, which is what we're going to see. So this is another configuration that we need to do in order to be operational, right? Okay, so we covered it. Now let's go to the fun part of the PCI, which you will see in the dashboard. Again, you understand the authorization system, right? I'm only picking up the infra here because I don't have anything in the app pretty much in my another subscription. Look here, this is last 7 days. This is also important to note what this is reporting for the last 7 days. So you may find an identity who is given a number of rights, but he or she is only using 10 or 15 of them. That does not mean necessarily that she or he is over provision from permissions perspective. This is where you, as an administrator, as an organizer, as an IAM guy, we need to decide whether that's appropriate or not. Because if you just go with this data set, you may say, oh, she doesn't need all these tasks, I'm going to remove that task, right? And that could be detrimental in your environment. So you don't want to do that. You got to be extra careful here. Now, once you click on this guy, you will see the breakdown of this PCI, right? Permission creep index, as I mentioned in my slide deck. So you see here, PCI, we have 106 identities in total on this authorization system, which is my subscription. 11 of them high, 95 of them low. It's not a very good score. It's a terrible score of 82 here. Ideally, you want to go in a green area instead of being in a red area, right?
And that's your goal. That's what you want to achieve. And if you click on this, it will also give you a breakdown, right? It will give you how many total users, how many of them high, how many applications, how many managed identities that you are using. And then you will see the breakdown further down here. If you go here, you will see that these are the inactive apps, active apps, inactive groups, super users, super apps, and over provision active user. As soon as you want to investigate further, before I go there, you can also see that it is also reporting that there are 2 blob containers which are accessible externally. So pretty good information. And you're also seeing there is a network security group which has also been left wide open, right? So important and very relevant information about your environment here. Now, if I click on one of them to do further investigation and see what's going on, then I see this is my authorization system, right? And it will take me to the reporting section right here. Now, the reporting we can go directly, but this is the user, which is me, who have been messing around in this tenant for last 3-4 years, giving you several gazillion videos that I have created so far. So I do a lot of mess here. Guess what? This is the PCI. How many permissions have been granted? How many I have been using? 11, right? So if I just go with this number and I start working out my permission, I'm going to screw myself up, right? So this gives you all the details about this user. And you can go here further up. And it gives you the information about this identity here, right? Which is the user, which roles it has been assigned. So you're getting a really, really intelligent data at your fingertips, depending on what you want. Now you can immediately, before you go further, you can say, hey, this guy is already an owner, man, right? See here. Now how, this is what I intentionally did for this demo here. This guy is an owner on the entire management group. Does he need this virtual machine contributor right? This is just, for the right or the wrong word, is stupid, because he already has the ownership right. Why do he has to be a virtual machine contributor? Why does he have to be this? This is all redundant and superfluous. This guy does not need all these additional rules, since he has got the rights, the ownership on the management group itself. So we got to be careful. This gives you the insight and intelligence for the next activity, which is the remediation part. And all this is what is coming here, guys. Don't forget, this is coming to this analytics, which is a huge compute that is happening in Azure, that once it gets the information, then it analyzes that. That's how you get these reports. So it's very systematically and professionally done thing, right? So going back again to dashboard, I'm going to come out of reports here. And going back into the portal here, right? So now we understand. Now you can also see super apps. So again, going to super apps, it will take you back to the reporting. Now, this just gives you the 2 super apps. These are the apps that I created, and these are, if you go and start digging further and say, oh my goodness, what's happening, right? Did I use that word in my earlier slide, OMG? Yes, this is what is the OMG, guys. And if you look here, the users, these are my users, which are 12% of users are inactive. Active users are 88. So 12 users are never even logging on, right? Date created, last active on, see here. These are just sitting there. I created for no reason, and they are sitting here. So this is where you might want to think, hey, do I need all these users here? Or maybe not. Or maybe these users are coming as a part of your Office 365 integration, and they are Office 365 users, but they never use your Azure, right? This is a realistic scenario. So this gives you a picture, but that does not necessarily mean that this is all garbage, right? That all inactive users could be removed. No, this is where your information about your organization is important. Look here, these are the service principal, 100% inactive. So can I go ahead and delete all of them? Perhaps not. I need to look into, evaluate each of them on its individual merits and say, hey, this is good information. Should I do that? By the way, if I just look at this AGP, which is what I use for something we call for governance policies, the Azure policies, we have a tool that we use. That's where it is being used. So if I have to provision some custom Azure policies. This is the service principle that I use in DevOps, and I go ahead and remove it. My whole DevOps is screwed up. My whole Azure policies are screwed up, right? So this is what I was saying. It's good information, but you have to use it wisely. This is my suggestion. Don't just jump on conclusions. And I know you guys all understand it, but I'm just being extra cautious here that we don't create mess for our environment. Serverless functions, I don't use it. Inactive groups, you will see it here, right? Again, the decision point is yours in this scenario until we go to the autopilot scenario. Super identities, you can see everything on your fingertip. As I mentioned, reporting is critical. This reporting is coming out of the data collection and analytics, right? So now you have these three super users and you see what's going on, what's their PCI, and you can start thinking into see whether I need this, whether I don't need this. Maybe this user, this shows test account. So right away it pops up in your mind that what is going on with this user? Why does a test account has 15,202 privileges, right? So if I click here for further investigation, I would see more details. I would see this is the domain account name, this is the user group, all users, he's only the member of all users group, so group is not a problem for him. I don't have to worry about him. So let's look at his roles, right? And look here. Okay, reader is okay. Virtual machine contributor probably is fine. He has been given twice. Why not? I don't know why, but we'll have to look into. This is investigation. But guess what? Test account has the ownership right on the infra. Does it not raise a red flag? It does, guys, and that's the whole point, value proposition we talked about. Right away, we have an action plan that we need to either remove this user or remove the permissions of this user for the AVA0 test, right? So this is the intelligence built in this cloud infrastructure entitlement management solution that Microsoft Entra brings to the table. I think it's significant, right? We keep going back and again here. We saw the dashboard. I can close this report here. I can close this another report that we are seeing here, right? We can come back here. It will open the reports back again. But this is exactly what we wanted to see. And if you see here, if you go further on the analytics parts, right? So now let's see what is going to happen here, right? Now we can see all users here. So you can pick it up what you want. Authorization system, you understand it. Identity type, let's say we need to do users, manage identity or application, you have a choice, right? So for an example, users you are already seeing, let's see the manage identity now, right? And now you can see the filters here. Now you can see inclusion in PCI calculation only, or you can see all, right? Or exclude, depending on how you want to do that. Type all task or all high risky task. I'm just going to do this here. But this, what I want to show you is gives you so many options to optimize your search criteria, right? 82. This is the identity. This is what is now it should raise a red flag. This is PCI index is 82. What is this managed identity doing, right? We need to look into and see what is this managed identity. And see here, if you dig it down, this has got all the, and this has the contributor rights, right? And what is this? It's permanent. Used, it gives you an approximate time and date here. And if you go to back to Azure roles, this is the contributor role, right? Now we are digging into this and we find that 5 days ago. So this is recent. So this is the kind of finding that we are talking about through analytics, and you can keep digging. And I'll go back again here, and if I say instead of saying here the users, right? And identity subtype all, right? All active, I can say all active. And I can say identity filters here, risky, right? And I can say risk, high risk or all risk, and say apply. See, my account pops up right away there, right? And you see what is happened. 7 executed, 516 granted. And if I go here, these are the permission that has been given, and what I'm using here, it shows you exactly what you're doing, right? Now, based on that, you can start making decisions. And again, as I said, this is where you have to be careful that what you're going to do is only reflecting for the time period this discovery was run, right? So now you can take any corrective actions against analytics, right? So this is powerful in my viewpoint. This gives you this information. Remember, if you have to do this work manually and you have got 8,000, 10,000 resources in your environment, you have identities that are, like for an example, the current project that I do has got about 400 full-time employees that work for my organization. I've got airlines, I've got customers. It's just massively big. So now the amount of the work that goes up is significantly higher if you go from that perspective, right? So that's the key here, right? So it is what it is, right? And you start seeing here, for an example, we defined that we have an issue with that AVA 01 test, right? So let's see how can we remediate it now. So if I go here and I say custom all, and I can try to find out, first of all, I can try to remediate. I can also create a custom role here, which is important, right? So if I say create a role here, before I go, you could define a activity of a user that you can clone. You can define an activity of a group you can create. You can create activity, or you can do it from an existing role, or you can start brand new. And I'm not going to go in all those details here, but it's self-explanatory, right? You can create new roles and start assigning. For an example, I just say new test, and I can start adding permissions here, boom, 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 and I'm good to go, right? But I'm not doing right now because that's not what I plan to do here. Now, if I need to go to this is roles, right? This is roles and policies. This is what you're creating the roles here. Now, if you go to the permissions tab here, actually I did one in back here for testing purposes, if you see here, right? I have not assigned it, but I tried and tested it. Now, if you go to the permissions tab here, users, right? And now you can search a username, right? For an example, that was AVA 01 test. Apply. See what happens here. Now you can see all the details that this AVA test is all users, so groups is not a problem. This is his identity, right? This is where the subscription, and he is the owner of this subscription. That's what we saw earlier, right? Remember that? He's a virtual machine contributor. He's a virtual machine contributor. He's a test user. So as a part of remediation task, which is what the value proposition is, I can revoke this is quick. I can revoke unused task. I can revoke high risk task right away. I can revoke delete task and assign read only status to. You could do that. Or you could remove rules. Remove roles or add roles. So for an example, if I decide to go remove roles, it should let me do that. So I'm going to try to remove this role, right? And now I can remove it here. I can submit it. Now, this is what I was talking earlier, right? If the controller would not have been enabled, that means you would have only the reader rights to that application. You would not be able to execute it. You would only be able to create a script. Since I have given the user access administrator rights on the management group, I am good to go and execute it, right? Now this has been submitted. It might take a few minutes to make an API call and get this thing done. We'll see it momentarily. Again, this is one thing. Now I can also try to remove these two users, two other roles as well on this guy, right? So this is very easy and simple to do that in my viewpoint. I just showed you how you can do this, right? So let's just see if this is removed now. So if you see the ownership role has gone for this user, right? This is the infra subscription, or this is my authorization system for all practical purposes, and it has removed the ownership right. So remediation task actually has been executed successfully. Not bad in my viewpoint, right guys? So let's look at the role and policy template. What does that really mean? Basically, we saw earlier here that you could create your own custom rules, right? Roles there, right? If I can go back, right here you can create roles, but this one allows you to create a template. So you can define that uh, what task would be required in terms of permissions on demand, right? And I say create a template here. I can give a name of the template here as Entra Demo, and I can define what permissions I want to give it to, right? For an example, I want to give the storage account. So I can start giving permissions here, right? I'm just showing you. It doesn't really mean unless I know what I really want. Let's say I did that. I created this role here and I have this role ready. Now, how does that work in the background is interesting. So as we all know that in our Azure, including AWS and GCP, we don't really work on templates. We work on roles, right? Roles, which is an accumulation or grouping of certain permissions. So what it will do here is when we do that and when we apply it, it will create a temporary custom role in the background, right? Once you execute it, once you assign it, and in that case, it will do it for the temporary time. And once it is done, it will delete that, right? So this is compared to the role, which is the different part here. When you created a role here, this is kind of a role you create, custom role is going to stay there. But role policy template is that it's going to create a temporary role, and the temporary role would be effective for the time period that you define, and once it is done, then it's going to delete it, right? So it's not you don't need to worry about cleanup effort of that particular role that you assign, temporary role. So this is very important to understand. Now, since you have the roles, and when we talk about permissions on demand, this is important, right? So first is that you can set a configuration here, and you can say the request settings, right? So if you go here, it defines you that how long that access would be allowed. This is just in time access that we discussed earlier in our DAC, right? You can change it to whatever. If you go here, it will give you a nice, easy interpretation of you can do ASAP, you can do once, daily, weekly, monthly, and how many days, how many weeks it actually counts to. So from your calculation perspective. So this is giving me a default 3-month time, right? And the user can activate that, user can use it. Now this you could turn it off or turn it on. What it means here is, if I say request for an approver, approve, reject, and cancel request, my request, so what it will happen in this case, if a user is going to request certain role or certain permissions on demand, it is going to send, before he can send this request or submit that request, he will get an email and he will get a passcode. He will get a code there. That code he has to submit his request to the portal, right? Likewise, once that request is submitted after getting the code in the email, when it goes for the approver, the approver would, depending on this setting here, approver would also get an email to approve it, and he would need to get the code again in the email. That code that he gets in the email, he has to pass it to approve it. So it's an additional layer of security, right? Depending on how your organization is, that's how it will be done, right? So the my request, now again, if you see here the my request here, you can create a new request. Now I would create this request because this user already has all the privileges, right? If you see back here, user, this is what I showed you earlier, right? This user, this is me. If I request, it doesn't make sense. This is this user who should be making request, right? Because she doesn't have all these rights. She wants to request it, right? So for an example, going back to the remediation part, and my request here. Now new request, first of all, our authorization system type is Azure. It could be AWS or GCP, right? My authorization system, you know now, this is my infra. The identity, now I can pick up the identity here or select an identity here, right? For an example, I just select DSP admin here. Now the scope is interesting. Now scope also, this is going for the entire subscription. I don't want to do it, so I want to do it here at Entra, right? And it will show me all Entra related. This is my resource group here, resource group Entra. If I choose this, this is only gonna go to the resource group. And now I can say request a role, request task, or request using a template that I showed you earlier. So let me try to do it slightly differently, and I'll show you, because DSP admin does not have an email account and it's not going to work the way I want to show you with the email chain process. Give me 1 second. Let me log in with another. So I'm logged in here as a different user, Kadia here, right? And I'm going to try to create a new request here, right? So again, the same thing, Azure. My system here is infra. Enter a username is Kadia. She cannot see anybody else because she doesn't have the rights. And now I can define the scope here, right? And instead of asking for, I can use the Entra here, which is the resource group, right? And I need to do a template, or I can request a role. Let's just do this here. And I would do, just for showing up, backup contributor. You can add as many as we want, but just for testing purposes, and I'm gonna send next, and I can say testing, give some information to the approver, Entra permission on demand, right? Or you can give more information if you like. The role selected scope, you can see that this is on resource group Entra, right? So you can absolutely sure where you are asking the right song, right? Now if I say submit here, this is where it's going to ask that one-time password or passcode. This is what is going to be received in the email. Now I think I know where her email is. Let me get there. So you see, she got this email. You're almost pleased following OTP to complete request, right? So this is where E66K. If I go back, where is it? Oh, not here. E66K, I guess, right? That's what it was, I believe so. Yep. So going back here on Kadia and say verify. Now the request has been submitted. So she receives a confirmatory email that her request has been submitted successfully. If you see on the screen here, now we need to go for the approval process. So I can see that in my request here, so she requested here, and on her side from Kadia, as an approver, I see that she has testing Entra permissions on demand, either approve it or reject it, right? So if I say approve here, it's going to ask me for a OTP, which I should have received on my email. So let me check my email and come back here. So I got an email for approval. You are almost done. Please, to complete your action, BEWH. If I go back to the Entra permission, what was that? I forgot. BEWH. Okay. BEWH, and I verify it. So now I have successfully approved. She should also get a message that I approved it, right? So now if I go back into, and it will take some time to get activated, it is still inactive, right? So as a user here, your request has been approved now for Kadia, right? And now it will wait for activation, and once it gets activated, it will show you activation email. Side by side, as an approver, I received an email too. You have approved a request, right? So this is good. Now we should be waiting for activation, and we'll see this is happening. If you see now, the status is activating here, and momentarily it will get activated. So it will take few minutes, and then the user would also get a email that your role is activated. All happening under the hood, under the cover. We followed the just-in-time principle. We also followed the just enough administration principle, right? Depending on how we do that, and it is a clear-cut demonstration of the Entra Permission Management. We also removed one role, if you recollect back from AVA01. So I showed you that. Seeing is believing, my friend, and you get acquainted to this portal. You start using it more often. You obviously getting wiser and wiser, and start utilizing these services more efficiently. That's my perception. It doesn't come in one day. It takes some time to get acquainted with all the functions, features, and including what you know about your environment, right? So it's just not a rocket science that is going to happen on the day one. So it looks like the activation is completed. The user received that email. It took almost 3 minutes between approval and activation. If I go back to the portal here and I refresh it, it should be activated now. And this has happened for 4 hours, custom 3 hours and 60 minutes. That's the time. And that's what the user requested. She could have chosen 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever she likes, but this is how it works. Now if I go back to the portal here and go to that resource group, Entra, and I check for access for Khadia, see, she got the right, and it is only available for 4 hours. And so if you look into the PIM concept, this is very similar to PIM, but the thing that is going to be different here, that PIM is a permanent thing, and you can use PIM for more permanent type of roles that you have defined, figure it out, configure it properly, use the principle of just enough administration carefully, and whenever you need permission on demand, then you can come back to Microsoft Entra, right, for granting permission. Now, Microsoft Entra, more use case, the bigger use case is to remove the permissions, remove the unwanted privileges, bring it back to the concept of least privileges model, right? That's where the whole value is. Addition is okay. You could do through PIM, you could do through here. Here you could be more granular. You can configure your task depending on what you want to do, what you want to allow the permissions to. So that's the value proposition here, guys. Moving forward, so you saw the whole remediation part here. Now let's look at the autopilot, which is going to be tricky. As I said, you can create a new rule here, right? Application manage identity. Applications or manage identity has at least one write permission granted, right? And I can put a rule name here. This is tricky. Intra auto. So now this is the infra, which is simple, and you can configure, right? Unused 90 days. Basically, you're gonna on demand, you're gonna remove it, right? So that's what it is. If you save it, you apply it, and then anything that is unused in 90 days is gonna take care of it. It's gonna get rid of it, right? Is it good for everything? Perhaps not, right? And that's the way. There is one way of folders to organize your multiple subscription. I forgot to mention that. And if you have organized your folders into your authorization system into folders, you could definitely do that, right? So that takes care of this portion. I'm not doing it. And then audit, you can deep dive, you can write here deep queries, date, this, that, and start doing the audit part, you know, for a particular resource, for a particular user. You can define the query as you like, and then you can execute it, right? So this is the deep packet inspection and audit. Reports I have already shown you. I think that covers the entire part of Azure.
Since I think I have covered almost everything that I need to talk to you about the Azure Permission Management, I think the video has already gone over 50 minutes. Adding GCP and AWS into this video probably would not be wise, so maybe we'll keep it for next time. And this would conclude this video. I hope this helps you. I hope this makes sense. As always, thank you for your precious time, and please provide me your feedback. This is most important for me to keep creating these videos and keep me motivated. Thank you again. Have a great day or great evening, whatever and whichever part of the world you are, and take care.